My name is City Gal Melanie. It was almost 4 years ago today, around this time, I met with Deirdre Capone to share her truth. Losers don't write history, have holidays, nor are they talked about in school, let alone written about favorably in our history books. I took an oath as a journalist to uphold the truth. Yet a truth told before its time can be dangerous, which is why I left mainstream media. Truth has always been dangerous to the rule of the rogue, the corrupt, the exploiter, and the robber. So the truth must always be suppressed until it's time. As I stated in my first interview, media can rarely be trusted. I am Generation X. A good majority of my generation was raised by our grands and our great-grands, Deirdre's generation. So we know a thing or two about a thing or two. What can we learn from Deirdre's story? What can we learn from the immigrants that came to Ellis Island, landing in America, this promised land, only to find out they landed into terror, as most don't know the real histories of American immigrants to Ellis Island, or what became of them. At this point in time, we all seem to be looking back at history, searching for answers, investigating our own histories, and adding up where the world took such a wrong turn. I think if people really research globally and real hard within Deirdre Capone's story and her timeline, we may all find the answers we need to add up to why America is the way it is today. And maybe, just maybe, if we can learn from the past, discover where things went wrong, we could heal and be the solutions for the future.
People think that Al Capone was part of the mafia. In order to be part of the mafia, you must be Sicilian. You must be born Sicilian. My family is not Sicilian, so they are not part of the mafia. Al Capone was his mother's fourth child, but he was the first one of her children that was conceived and born in America. He represented to her the reason she and her husband struggled so hard to come to this new country. Italy was run by either the church or the Camorra, which is another gang, black-handed gang kind of thing. So people over there, unless they were part of the church or part of the gang, really didn't have the opportunities to become what they wanted to become. And Italians that came to America before my grandfather and grandmother would write back to their families, yes, come. There's opportunity here. There's, some really opportunity for people to come. So the Italians would kind of spur the other Italians to leave their roots, to leave their home, and to come to this new country because there was an opportunity here. But they would all, kind of go in the same neighborhoods so they could continue to, talk Italian and, do the old country kind of things. But they knew the opportunities were here. I believe the spurring factor was when his father died. That left his mother, all she could do was, sew and bake bread. And there's little kids that are home. I mean, just very, very young kids. So my grandfather and Al, my grandfather was the oldest, and Al knew that they had to do something to try to take care of their family. Al had an incident, acquainted with Johnny Torrio in Chicago, and he started as a bouncer for him at one of his, places. And Al proved himself to Johnny Torrio. So Johnny Torrio started to give him more and more responsibility. Johnny Torrio owned a bunch of roadhouses, they called it back then. There were roadhouses all along the major highways in the big cities, and mainly they were, prostitution places, but they would serve the gentleman beer. And that's why, Johnny Torrio was into beer. And he started it, when Prohibition came in, he didn't want the roadhouses to stop, so he found a way to get the beer and keep the beer and, keep that beer in the roadhouses. So he started to give more and more responsibility to Al. And then when Torrio was shot, he said, I can't do this anymore. And so, Al called for my grandfather and said, Ralph, there's an opportunity for us here, but you're the businessman. So I need you to come to Chicago to help me run, this business. And that's what started it. Prohibition needed a constitutional amendment to start, all right? Now, it started because of what happened in the First World War. The First World War was a very bloody war. And we first got our motion pictures, going during that war. So we got a lot of newsreels back from there in the trenches. It was fought in the trenches, and it was just a brutal, brutal, bloody war. Well, when they signed the peace agreement, the Germans immigrated to America, and they were bringing their talents with them, which were spirit making, beer making. And there was a group of people who didn't want the Germans to be successful because they carried grudges about the First World War. So they got together and they put this, forth that they would prohibit. And most people have a misunderstanding of prohibition. They didn't prohibit the owning of alcohol or the drinking of alcohol. They only prohibited the selling of alcohol and the transportation of alcohol. So you could, build your own still and make your own alcohol. I mean, wine was served in the White House, for special dinners all through Prohibition. So it was just, my uncle called, drinking illegal unless you were on South Shore where they called it hospitality. So that was just, people wanted alcohol. So then to end it, we needed a constitutional amendment to end it also. The hard liquor came from either the islands, Canada after they stopped their prohibition days, and then also from, various other countries and stuff. The beer was actually brewed right in Chicago. I call Al Capone's business the very first franchise of its type.
Wow.
Absolutely everybody that worked for him felt they owned part of the business. People got into the business, men got into the business because it was a chance to take care of their families, to provide for their families. And it was something that people wanted to do. And it, they served good alcohol too. There was never any, rot gut alcohol that was served. It was fine alcohol that was served to the people. I've never ever talked to anybody that had anything to do with the outfit of those days or my family that did not have high regard and high praise for them. Fair gaming tables, Al Capone could do it. They feared him. And they because he really ran a business. It was a business. If somebody knew you were related to Al Capone or you were a friend of Al Capone, they left you alone. What he said to you, he did. I mean, there was no double crossing at all, ever. Louis Armstrong used to come and play in their casino. And one night Louis, played and his trumpet disappeared. Well, to have the trumpet disappear was like the end of his career. And he said something to Al Capone, my trumpet is gone. I'll get it back for you, and he did. Oh my God. And Louis Armstrong would tell everybody that, that Al Capone got my trumpet back for me. I'm sorry, there was a club in Harlem, New York, called the Cotton Club. My grandfather opened up a very similar club to that in Cicero, Illinois, and it was called the Cotton Club. And he modeled it after the club that was in Harlem. The difference between the two places is that Harlem was in the black neighborhood, and so the black artists could come and go and perform in that club. In Chicago, the blacks were on the west side of Chicago, and they couldn't go through the white neighborhoods to get to the Cotton Club. My grandfather would send, chauffeur-driven, limousines, armed guards, to pick up these artists, bring them to the Cotton Club. After they performed, take them back safely home. As a young girl in high school, my grandfather took me to Rush Street in Chicago, to the to the Chez Paris, and I saw a man perform there called Nat King Cole. After the performance, we went backstage to meet him. Nat King Cole came up to me and he told me himself, I want you to know that I would not have a career without your uncle and your grandfather. I tell a story in my book, and it's a real story. It's about two women, spinster women, sisters, who wanted to go to Chicago for a long weekend. So they saved their money, and they were teachers, and they saved their money, and they were going to go and see the theater. And on the way into Chicago, they had a flat tire. So they had to stop, and they're wondering what to do with this flat tire. And all of a sudden, this car pulled up, and the back window rolled down, and this man said, "Do you ladies need help?" And they said, "Yes, we've got a flat tire, and we don't know what to do." So the gentleman in the back told the driver to go and help these two women. So he got out and he changed the tire for them. And so, they said thank you, and then the man in the back seat handed the women, he asked, what are they doing in the city? Well, we came, to go to the theater and just to see the big city. So the man handed them his business card. Said, if you ladies need anything while you're in Chicago, give me a call. And of course, this card said, Al Brown, used furniture dealer. So anyway, the ladies on the last night wanted to go to the theater. And they had this cash that they needed to buy gas to go back, and they didn't want to take it to the theater in case, they lost it or something. So they kept it in their hotel room. So they went to the theater and they came back to the hotel room, and the money was gone. It disappeared. And they didn't know what to do. They didn't have enough money to buy gas. So of course they pulled out this card and they called Al Brown and said, Mr. Brown, this happened, and I was wondering if you could possibly help us. So he said, well, where are you? What hotel? He said, stay in your room. 15 minutes later, there was a knock at the door, and the women opened up the door, and there was the hotel clerk, ashen-faced, looking at them, handing them a wad of bills saying, why didn't you tell me you were friends of Al Capone? And that's what it was back then. There are people out there who feel that they know more about my family and that whole era than I do. So I just call them gangsterologists. In reality, he was kind of trapped inside the Hawthorne Hotel because, there are people out there that were going to try to shoot him. I mean, he was shot at one time. Bullets were flying all over the place, and he did not get hurt at all. But they wanted to knock the top hat off the guy, the leader, so all these other bootleggers could take over that business. So he was kind of trapped inside that business. If you go to Alcatraz and you're in the gift shop, it will show you up on the wall all of the crimes that the inmates that were there committed. 30, murders, all these train robberies or whatever is up there. 2 were incarcerated there for income tax evasion, and that was Al Capone and his bodyguard. He pleaded and petitioned to go there. He did whatever he had to go to Alcatraz so he could take care of him. The issue for me is most of what I have read about my family is wrong. And, I've talked to historians, and I said, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts. People want to sell a story, they want to sell a book, and so they want to come up with some, little bit of information that nobody else could find, and they just make it up. I've been places where people say, oh, I know everything about Al Capone. I said, oh, really? What do you know? Well, he committed the Valentine's Day Massacre. No, he did not, and I have proof that he was not involved in the Valentine's Day Massacre. Well, he died in prison. No, he did not die in prison. He died of syphilis. No, he did not die of syphilis, and I have proof of that too. Well, he had the mental capacity of a 3-year-old when he died. No, he did not, and I have proof of that also. He was sent to Alcatraz because he really did commit murder. No, he was sent to Alcatraz so he could not file a writ of habeas corpus and have a new trial for income tax evasion. They wanted him away from his outfit because the end of Prohibition was coming. If you really look at that timeline, and I've got all the steps all along the way, it was for that reason only. And we are going to start with February 14th, 1929. Al Capone's youngest brother, Matthew Capone, I called him Uncle Matty, told me a story one night. And he said, Deirdre, your Uncle Al gave me a task to talk to Bugs Moran and try to talk some sense into his head, that it was silly to fight among themselves because there was more than enough business for everybody. So he said, Deirdre, I sat in a car with Machine Gun Jack McGurn, and we were trying to sit there and wait to see Bugs come into the warehouse, and we were going to go in and we were going to talk with him. But he said, Deirdre, we were sitting in the car, and a police car filled with policemen went down the alley, and then it came back, and then it went down the alley, and then it came back. And he said, we got scared. Now, back in those days, the police would arrest people for vagrancy at the drop of a hat. If they, stood too long and stared at a window, they'd get put in jail for days. No bootlegger could do business more than 2 days without the cooperation of the politicians and the police. When the politicians found they could line their pockets with money by only allowing certain beer trucks in their wards, that started the beer wars. Well, J. Edgar Hoover was the head of the Bureau of Investigation. He was in charge of the Bureau of Investigation. At that time, our government was turning into a federal government rather than the individual states doing things. So he turned it into a federal government, and it was going to become the Federal Bureau of Investigation. J. Edgar Hoover wanted to be the first, head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And of course, that had to be voted on by Congress. He didn't have the votes because people weren't impressed because he had never solved any crime. So that's when J. Edgar Hoover decided to transfer Al Capone to Alcatraz. And he let everybody know, well, I'm under a gag order. I cannot tell you, but we do have the goods on Al Capone, and he deserves to be at Alcatraz. They sent him then to Atlanta, where he hired all new lawyers. He was preparing something that's called a writ of habeas corpus. It's the last-ditch effort that somebody has to say he was wrongly convicted of a crime. He was 1 day away from, filing that and going back to Cook County and having a new trial. When they whisked him away and they took him by train to Alcatraz. Now, why Alcatraz? Alcatraz had no writ of habeas corpus. Abraham Lincoln removed it because it was a military prison before it was, a penal prison. So, so that soldiers didn't go back and escape or whatever. But anyway, and the government, the people in government knew that. They knew he could not file for a new trial, that he would have to stay in jail so that they could get done what they wanted to get done. But what Alcatraz had to replace the writ of habeas corpus was time off for good behavior. Oh, Al Capone, I've got a newspaper article where Al Capone offered the United States government $1 million to pay his taxes. They refused it. He only owed $30,000.
And
they would not take the $1 million. And he was getting out in 6 years rather than 11 years. And of course, the powers to be didn't want him to come back into power again. So they devised this whole thing, and my grandfather told me this with tears streaming down his cheeks. They called from Alcatraz and said, your brother is getting out, in a few months. And there's now a new treatment for syphilis that we would like to try on your brother. My grandfather agreed to it. So they took my uncle off of Alcatraz and they put him in a hospital on Terminal Island, which is just off of Los Angeles. They started to treat him for syphilis. Well, what they started to do, or what they did, is give him injections of mercury. Mercury was a treatment for malaria. It causes you to go out of your mind. And Al Capone didn't like it. He didn't want to have those shots. He would do anything. And that's the first time you would ever see that he had any anger issues at all. But they kept injecting him. My family was called by Father Clark. Father Clark used to go to the hospital to give my uncle communion. And he would call May and said, they're killing him. You've got to do something to get him out of there. So anyway, before he got out of prison, he was examined by the head doctor on Terminal Island because they wanted to say that he was senile. He was out of his mind. And I've got the paper that said the doctor examined him and said, no, if he was taken to a court of law and he was judged by a jury, they would find him competent. So, this thing that he had the mind of a 3-year-old, no, he didn't. As I said to you, Al Capone ran a really good outfit. If he wasn't incarcerated, if he was allowed to stay in Chicago until the end of Prohibition, my family would have gotten the first legal distribution liquor company that was awarded by the government. The reason Eliot Ness's name is so famous is that in 1956, there was a television show that came out, and it was over 2 nights. The Untouchables was the very first work done by a new studio called Desilu Studio, and it was owned by Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball. Now, what most people don't know is that Desi Arnaz and Al Capone's son, Sonny Capone, were very, very close friends. They were like brothers. Both of them were only children, boys, and both of their fathers were criminals. So they really hung out together. Desi would play the bongos, and Sonny Capone would sing, and they would just have a grand old time. Well, during that time, Sonny would open up and tell Desi all about his life and his father, and Desi would also tell Sonny about, Cuba and things that were going on there. So when my family heard that they were going to do the Untouchables, they knew that, Desi told Lucy, all about everything that Sonny was telling her. So my family called Desi, and Sonny called Desi and said, Desi, please don't do this. And Desi told Sonny, it's Lucy. Lucy is running this, and I cannot stop her. So my family, I sat and watched the shows with my Aunt May and my Aunt Maffy, and I had to write down on a pad of paper every time I heard Al Capone's name spoken. But at the last minute, Lucy decided to make Eliot Ness the star and the focus of the Untouchables rather than Al Capone. Al Capone was implied, but it was all about Eliot Ness, and he got Al Capone, and the whole focus was on him. Eliot Ness didn't ever do anything. All of a sudden, he's this famous person, and it was Lucy that didn't want to be sued by the Capone family that did it. President Hoover had no idea who Al Capone was. When Al Capone had a house on Palm Island in Miami, and all of the boys from the outfit would come there and get warm during the winter, and they would love to shoot their guns into the bay. Well, living next door to him was an aristocratic man. You might have heard of him, but he was J.C. Penney. And Mr. Penney didn't like to hear those guns being fired in the bay. So he complained to Herbert Hoover, said, you've got to do something about Al Capone. And Hoover said, who the heck is Al Capone?
Oh my goodness.
That's truth. That's the truth. The Secret Six was a group of businessmen, and they were very secret. People didn't know who they were, but they ran everything in the city of Chicago. These were very influential businessmen, in businesses like stocks, bonds, rubber, tires, steel, stockyards. And they took great exception to somebody like Al Capone, who was an son of immigrants, rising to the point of influence and power, and of course wealth. So they wanted to bring him down. They wanted him to be put away before the World's Fair was being held in Chicago that year. The American Bar Association in Chicago in 2015 held a mock trial where they were trying Al Capone for murder in the Valentine's Day Massacre. They invited me to attend the mock trial. Now, in 1991, the American Bar Association retried Al Capone for income tax evasion. All right, they used a real jury, they used, real witnesses, everything. They found him not guilty on all counts. The 2015 mock trial had to be a mock trial because my uncle was never tried for murder. So it was a mock trial, but they used a real judge, they had, real jury. They acquitted him. They could not convict him because the evidence was not there. But the outfit was still there in some way, shape, or form. I think it's still, some of it is there. It's just never been absorbed. It's never gone away. It's gotten into other things. My grandfather told me that they wanted nothing to do with the outfit after they got into drugs. They wanted nothing at all to do with drugs. Drugs controlled people. Drugs made people do things that they really didn't want to do, and they wanted nothing at all to do with that. I think he was murdered because he was writing a tell-all book. It was called The Sins of the Father, and he was naming names. I read the manuscript, and I don't know whatever happened to the manuscript, but I read it, and he was naming names. He was telling exactly the truth about what was going on and everything that, was going on behind the scenes. He just wanted people to know. When my father was murdered, my grandfather, they held an inquest and they had a family meeting, and the family decided to just let it go that he committed suicide. But, there's so many different reasons why that was hard for them. We're Catholics, Catholics don't go to heaven if you commit suicide. But there was just too much danger to the other family members to investigate that anymore. And because I was raised by the Capones, I believe one of the things that would bother them is a lack of responsibility. It seems that people don't feel responsible for hurting somebody else, or for cheating, or for lying. It is like, that's commonplace. And I believe that would really concern my family. It concerns me. There are secrets about my life, family secrets, that will just stay with me and nobody else needs to know. His mother, my great-grandmother, I held her hand when she took her last breath on this earth. And she looked at me and in her own way gave me the job that I had to tell the people that they were good people, that we were good people.
It has often been said throughout the ages, there are three things that cannot be hidden forever: the sun, the moon, and the truth. What lies ahead to clear the Capone family name? Maybe, just maybe, we may all find out. And may we all find the justice we deserve.